Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, sending you loads and loads of love, and I really do hope that you're having a fabulous day. I don't know what your time zone is, but get that lovely hot cup of coffee or cocoa or tea, whatever it is that you drink, and you're about to hear a wonderful story. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Kirk and I'm from Boulder in Colorado, which is a town nestled in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains and is home to lots of marvellous hiking trails and adventure opportunities for the outdoor enthusiast, much like myself. I live in an old school vintage neighbourhood that was originally called Hill Street but is now called Mapleton Hill, a name that was born as a result of the addition of 200 maple trees that were originally planted on the street. I live on the west side of Mapleton Hill in a stunning, beautiful green leafy suburb with verdant green turf and ubiquitous green leafy trees and very attractive old world historic retrograde homes, along with some houses that in more recent years were remodelled, restored and modernised. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, but moved to Boulder with my wife Polly in 2001 and have never regretted my decision to move here, because we're so centrally located, which means that we literally are only a couple of blocks away from downtown, and yet at the very same time we are so close to the natural fauna and flora of the idyllic Colorado countryside, and so we quite literally have it all here, and I wouldn't want to live anywhere else in the world. I work for a company here that manufactures natural organic products, from shampoos to soaps, teas, honey, cereals, and so much more, as invariably people have become very savvy and streetwise of late, choosing to steer away from chemicals and harmful substances, most especially genetically modified foods, which I personally consider to be very harmful and exceedingly dangerous. I ardently believe the conspiracy theories that these crops were specifically engineered for nefarious motives, as if they harm the natural wildlife, what are they doing to our own bodies? I live in this neighbourhood in an antiquated Tudor-style home with a traditional steeply pitched black roof, multiple overlapping front-facing gables, a stucco exterior accentuated with dark brown trim, which is set against pretty whitewashed walls and large French windows. It has that quintessential old-world English country charm about it, with a very exquisite yard that denotes the feelings of being in a magical, enchanting and quaint English country garden, so full of petunias, geraniums, lavenders, daisies, and plenty of very vital, vivid, beautiful roses, with some rambling climbers that grow against our front door in a resplendent display of vibrant colour. I live in this sumptuous, cosy, retro abode with my wife Polly and our two daughters Jasmine and Delilah. My inexplicable, unorthodox story that ultimately led to my outlandish, anomalous encounter with the hairy man that we like to call Bigfoot happened in the spring of 2009. It all began when my family decided to spend a long weekend camping at the San Juan National Forest in southwestern Colorado, which comprises roaring waterfalls over volcanic peaks, prepossessing streams, high desert mesas, alpine peaks, scenic prairies, rugged outcrops, arresting mountainous valleys, and thousands of back roads, not to mention hundreds of miles of trails to explore. At that time, my two children were about 6 and 8 years old. We drove down some very bumpy back roads that caused our four-wheel drive to wobble precariously. Finally, we arrived at our chosen location at first light, when the orange light of the sunrise veiled the escarpment in golden hues, and it was breathtaking to behold. I was looking forward to the camping trip, as it was an escapism from the daily grind and challenges of the monotonous drudgery of orders, accounts and stopbooks, and a golden, perfect opportunity to simmer down, relax and unwind. This splendiferous, lavish wilderness was sprinkled with an abundance of alpine trees, from ponderosa pines, Douglas firs and Engelmann spruces, all set up against a ravishing backdrop of the most breathtaking, exquisite views over the mountains. Before long, Polly and I found the most perfect spot to set up our sizable tent, which we did in a remote area surrounded by spruce trees and overlooking the most enchanting, exquisite-looking stream with powerful jets of water that went cascading over the rocky outcrops. We noticed a couple of big-horned sheep drinking at the water's edge, but although they observed us, they were neither skittish nor wary, and my children were delighted to observe these creatures, as they are passionate animal lovers. "Look, Mummy, the dog's got horns," said my young child Jasmine, pointing at the critter with delight. "It's got horns, Mummy." "It's not a dog, dear," my wife told her. "That's a big horned sheep. Isn't he lovely?" As we had young children with us, my wife and I were not doing much hiking, although I decided that while my wife unpacked and entertained the kids, I would take a little stroll around the area to stretch my legs, get my bearings, and get some much-needed exercise. Working so hard had meant that I had been inactive for quite a long while, and I realised how unfit I had become. It was a sensationally beautiful day, with the sunshine enveloping my body in a radiant warmth, so reminiscent of early spring. I felt very at one with the natural world. After a while I sat on a smoothly rocky outcrop and watched the jets of foaming white water cascading across the rocks. That was when I saw something that quite literally knocked my socks off. At first I thought it was a bear, as it was straddled in the water in a seating position, soaked from the waist down. It reminded me of the bears that I'd seen in Alaska during the salmon run. I remember thinking to myself, that is one hell of a large grizzly bear, because from the back view of this thing it was absolutely colossal and was an attractive tawny brown colour. I stood very still like a frozen statue, hardly daring to move a muscle so as not to disturb the bear, who thankfully was blindly oblivious to my presence. With great stealth and discretion, I surreptitiously crept furtively behind a high rocky boulder, where I laid my body down low on the ground in a comfortable obscure position and began to focus on the bear with my binoculars. My heart was fluttering with excitement and my fingers trembling as I tried to focus on the creature. I've always adored bears. They intrigue and fascinate me. Even as a young boy growing up, I was given some valuable teddy bears that are sought after today, like Staife and Bing bears, which I still have in my collection, and they're in remarkably good condition, even if I say so myself. Such was my love of those big balls of fluff. So as I focused my binoculars steadily upon the bear, I perceived that it was eating an enormous fish in his hands and spitting out the bones in the water. That was when it suddenly struck me like a bolt of lightning. Wait a minute, grizzlies don't have hands, they have paws. I nearly dropped my binoculars in my incredulity because I couldn't even contemplate what this incongruous creature actually was. In that moment I began to shake violently like a wobbling jelly, not at all from fear, but from heightened sense of wonderment and consternation. Whatever it was, it appeared to be a skilled fisherman, as it didn't seem to have much trouble in catching fish. I recognised that without a fishing rod, catching a fish with your hands is pretty much a non-starter for most of us humans, but not for this critter. I watched his humongous-sized hands moving with record speed, with about the same amount of efficiency and startling accuracy as a fish eagle. He would pounce on something in the water, withdrawing it with effortless ease, and I would see the fish wiggling in his hand. And he bit into the head first, and proceeded to eat the rest of the fish, chomping it down with large bites, and always spitting out anything he didn't want. I could see the large jaws of his moving up and down. He was clearly enjoying his food. I watched the critter for a long while, and after he'd eaten his fill and was no longer hungry, and was finally satisfied with a full stomach, he rose out of the water like a masterful giant, and began striding in my direction. He manoeuvred his bent, powerful legs with a seamless grace and fluidity. I was quite literally bedazzled and bewitched by what I was observing, and extremely astonished that I believe fear didn't even enter the equation for me. Instead, I continued to shake with a feverish exuberance, and it was challenging to keep my binoculars still. All I kept thinking is, what the heck is that, over and over again in my mind, like a video on rewind. The critter was easily over 9 foot tall, and that is erring on the side of caution, as I'm not predisposed to exaggeration by any manner of means. The only way I can describe the creature to you is that he looked like an ape-man. What features defined him as an ape, or what defined him as a human, I could not determine, but that was my impression of the creature. The creature was uncannily human-like in its facial aspects and its human-like silhouette, which was infinitely much larger than that of any man. I think in circumference his burly, hefty bulk was easily over 3 foot wide, and from a weight perspective, he could have easily weighed between 700 to 800 pounds, or even more, but I'm not certain of these facts. I noted that the critter was very large in his upper torso, with Herculean-sized shoulders and very muscular overlong arms. It possessed a low-slung pyramid-shaped head that flowed in a curly horizontal line to the shoulders, and there was no indication from what I could ascertain that the critter had any neck, which I know sounds exceedingly odd. The hairless dark tan leathery face was very broad and square-shaped, with a very wide flat nose, prominent crinkled brow ridge, thin wide mouth, and deep-set golden eyes. I promise you, as this creature walked, his long flowing hair blew backwards against the gentle breeze like a field of wheat blowing in the wind. The sun cast its light over the creature's hair, and that was when I discerned some very distinctive, attractive auburn hues in the coat. I kid you not, the critter never saw me, but at one point he was only yards away from me. I could hardly believe it. In my opinion, he was remarkably lofty, majestic, awesome as a creature, and he seemed rather handsome in a rugged sort of way. I'm certain he must have been eye candy for the females of his species, because he was really rather good-looking, with a gentle, serene energy about him that was very prepossessing. I knew in my gut that if the creature had indeed seen me, he may have been elusive and glided away as quickly as he could, but I know he would not have been uncongenial or even aggressive towards me. Of that I am sure. When I returned to our camp, I was reminiscing in my mind about what I'd just seen. I felt incredibly privileged and blessed to have encountered such a remarkable-looking beast, and my mind kept recollecting my outlandish experience and hearkening back over it again and again in my mind. My wife kept complaining bitterly that I was seemingly distracted and was not listening to a word that she said. "What on earth is wrong with you, Kirk?" she moaned. "Since we got here, your head has been in the clouds. It's like you're far away in another world. How many times have I got to tell you to get the fire started? Or should I do it?" "What, dear?" I said, looking bemused and not really listening to a word she was saying, as my mind was 1,000 miles away, recapturing my memories. "Kirk, the fire," she snapped. "Get a move on, will you? It's getting late and the kids need to eat. They're hungry and they're snacking on sweets. You know when they eat candies, it robs them of their appetite." Before long we were eating our barbecue, which consisted of spatchcock chicken and sausages, with salads and garlic bread. And although delicious, throughout my meal I never said a single word, much to my wife's growing annoyance and agitation. "I'm going to bed with the kids," said my wife. "I can see I'm not going to get a word out of you today. You seem so distracted, preoccupied, unfocused. I was hoping we could have a romantic evening together, gazing at the stars and marvelling at all the constellations. I envisaged us sitting under the stars, drinking some white wine, roasting some marshmallows together over the open flames of the fire pit. Well, I can see that's not going to happen. You're far too vague for any of that tonight. You really are in a complete daze. I've never seen you like this before." "Night-night," I said in a disinterested, nonchalant way. "I'll join you in a moment. I just want to stay out here a little longer and watch the fire." All of a sudden I could hear a helicopter hovering very low over our heads. This helicopter appeared to be looming over our campsite in a very suspicious, sinistrous way, and what made it even more ominous and inauspicious was it didn't have any lights on, which made it even more baleful and portentous. As you can imagine, I was haunted by the strange manner of events that were unfolding before my very eyes. Something didn't feel right, and the peculiar behaviour of the blacked-out helicopter seemed nonsensical to me. What the heck was going on, I wondered, and why was this helicopter scrutinising our campsite so curiously? It didn't feel right. I watched it circling us, and then the immediate area, and then went flying away. If that wasn't peculiar enough, the very same outlandish behaviour continued over the next 2 consecutive nights, and it was beginning to alarm me and disturb me ever so much. I am glad to say that my wife seemed blindly oblivious by these strange shenanigans, and I don't believe she even heard the helicopter, but if she did, she never made any mention of it. By this stage I was determined to find out what was going on, and why the helicopter was so interested in our campsite. It was decidedly odd and exceedingly discomposing because it felt as if my family was under surveillance or investigation of some kind, and that was very perturbing. The following night, after my kids and wife were happily tucked away in their sleeping bags, once again I heard the familiar droning sound of the helicopter flying overhead, and that was when I climbed out of my tent to take another look. By this time I was feeling enraged and very disenchanted by what was going on, as these events reeked of sinister intent. I thought about my role in the natural health industry and my drive to alert people to the dangers of monosodium glutamate and GMO foods, and I began to wonder if someone had been hired to shut me up. I know it sounds preposterous, but whistleblowers are often taken out, and I'd recently received some official unmarked letters telling me to shut up about GMO foods, or I'd be very sorry. I now felt certain that someone had hired a hitman to take me out. It would be a perfect excuse, I thought. I'd just be registered as another missing man that went disappearing in an area of national forest. To my amazement, I could see the helicopter landing several yards away from our tent, and I discerned some men in black with some seriously lethal-looking high-powered rifles getting out of the craft, and then I heard the helicopter taking off again, leaving the men behind on the ground. By this point, I was terrified. My heart was pumping violently in my chest, and I was sweating profusely. I knew that they were after me, and not my wife and kids, so instead of running away from them, I moved closer towards them to find out what was going on. I could hear the muffled voices of the men talking in military language about locations. I saw them disappearing into the thick area of spruce trees, and I could hear a number of rifles going off, like something you would expect to hear in a war zone. It was incredibly distressing and, quite frankly, absolutely terrifying, but it became very clear to me that I was not the target, after all, which was, in fact, a huge relief. My wife got out of her sleeping bag and came running out to me, asking me what the hell was going on. I lied to her, telling her someone was having a party with firecrackers. "You've got to be joking," she said, returning back to her sleeping bag. "That's got to be the most selfish thing, startling all the wild animals like this. I can't imagine it's legal or ethical to have firecrackers in a national park. I've a good mind to report those people. If I jumped out of my skin, imagine how those wild animals are feeling right now." Even my kids began to howl and cry because they were so terrified by the excessive noises that my wife had to comfort them and calm them down. "It's nothing to worry about, sweetheart. The banging sounds are just fireworks. Someone's having a party. Now go back to beddy buys like a good girl," she said, kissing my daughter on the cheek. It looked like that. I watched in horror as once again the helicopter landed yards away from our tent, and 5 military-looking men, all dressed in black, were carrying the dead, colossal, heavy body of a hairy humanoid ape, much like the one I'd seen a few days prior, on this large stretcher. I watched in absolute disgust as I heard one of the men say, "We got him," and they climbed back into the helicopter with the beast. After the helicopter flew away, I heard the most gut-wrenching cries permeate over the whole wilderness area, and the sound was so traumatic and discomposing. I was in no doubt that I was hearing the sounds of these strange human-like creatures grieving the loss of their deceased loved one. I'm not ashamed to say that the sound was so grievously sad, it brought tears to my eyes, and I began to sob uncontrollably. My wife rushed over to my side to console me when she was awoken by my cries. "Kirk, what the heck is the matter with you?" asked my wife, looking very upset to see me so emotional. "I've never seen you so distressed before. The last few days you've been in another world, and now you're crying like a baby. Is something going on that you're not telling me about? Have you got cancer? Or is there something terrible happening at work that I need to know about?" "It's nothing like that," I lied. "I think I'm a little concerned about Dad's hip operation next week. He's not getting any younger, you know." My wife looked at me and took me into her arms and patted me gently on the back. "Is that what this is all about? I might have guessed. You've got nothing to worry about, darling. It's amazing what they can do these days with surgeries. Your father's going to be absolutely fine. I can promise you about that." Of course, my father was fine after his hip surgery, but for a very long time I grieved for that mysterious beast who had been so callously annihilated by those military men for some mysterious reason that I just don't know. I just hope that they had a good justified reason for taking out that creature in the ruthless, reckless and merciless way that they did. I'll never know the answer to that question, yet I do know this, that they left a trail of devastated, inconsolable hearts behind them, because I heard and felt the woeful heartbreak over the valley that night, with cries that were so desperately sad and desolate, it almost broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. For indeed this anguish energy was so perceived that even my own children said, "Daddy, there's some really sad people crying. Did something bad happen to them?" All these years later, I've never told anyone my incredulous story, not even my wife or children. I do not really know why, but I'm pleased to share it with you and your listeners in this safe, anonymous forum. All these years later, I believe, and I'm in no doubt, that I encountered a Bigfoot that day. I also emphatically believe that they're not all dangerous monsters that we've been led to believe, and I am certain the military have also been involved in secretive missions to take out some of these majestic beasts. If this is indeed the case, I hope that they only cull the critters that are aggressive, threatening and dangerous to humans, because it would be nonsensical to kill them for no reason, especially if they're gentle and kind. In my opinion, these creatures are almost too human to just blatantly kill, and we should really think about what we're doing first. So there you are. That's my story. Thank you so much for that incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.